What's going on, guys, and welcome back to another Reddit video here on the Life Stories channel. My name's Dylan, and today we're going to be looking at some stories from the subreddit Tales from Retail, so sit back, relax and enjoy the show. Customer demands free stuff for doing a return at the wrong place. Sorry, I just have to get this off my chest. I'm working at a fairly large bookstore, but the store is usually chill. However, today's just be one of those days where I want to throw myself off a building and curse everyone with my blood sacrifice. 30 minutes before the store closes, a man comes in with a return, and I see right off the bat that it's not an item that we carry. It's 2 external battery packs, and I work at a bookstore. You can see where I'm going with this. Therefore, it's not an item that we can return. The customer gets pissy at the answer and screams that he'd been in contact with customer service and they directed him to come to our store to do a return. I tell him as the manager on duty that we can't return this because we can't process it. The item's literally not in our database and he'll have to take the item to the correct store. He continues to insist that the customer service told him to bring it in, so I ended up calling them because I want to get to the bottom of this. But customer service is just as confused. Customer service just reiterates what I said and the man starts screaming at them instead, saying that he was told specifically to come to this store to do the return. By this point, I've lost all patience when suddenly a new hire with no self-preservation skills comes along, and I can see in the angry screaming man's eyes that he's imprinted. He immediately dismisses me, a tiny 5-foot lady, the manager on duty, and instead homes in on the new guy. He doesn't actually acknowledge me at all, even though I'm speaking to him, and completely ignores me and only speaks to the new hire, which was a 5'9" guy. He begins the whole thing again with the new hire, saying that he has a return. The new hire, understandably confused, tells him what everyone's told him. The screaming man changes course after that and demands new hire just give him a free item, something worth about $30, and then to just throw $20 in there as well for my troubles. As if we're making him some kind of care package. My ears did a double take at that. Did I hear that right? Am I in hell? I openly laugh in his face when I realise he's serious, which finally gets his attention. I tell him no. He looks at me like I'm insane and actually utters completely seriously these words out of his face hole. This is how customer service works. No, it's not, and you can get out of my store. He then points at the new hire, what the hell, I'm right here, I've told you multiple times that I'm the manager, and says, "You're taking responsibility for this," and leaves. The new hire is completely uncertain as to what to do. I tell him not to worry about it, and if he needs to take a breather to get off the floor, he's earned a break. Anyone else would have taken the break, but he's just a genuinely good guy, so he declines the offer and says he's good. Damn son, what did we do to deserve you? I make him take one anyway. Now, of course I'm not going to let this screaming sphincter of a man single out a new hire, so I've alerted all the other managers what's happened as well, and the new hire is not to be blamed in any way or any form. If they want they can blame it on me, and if they fire me then Dobby will be free. Oh, but hilariously that's not the last we've heard of him. After the store's closed, the phone rings, but because I'm busy one of the other associates picks up. They realise who it is immediately because they've witnessed the whole thing. It's the screaming return man. Of course the store is closed, so therefore we have no way to help him. Ah well, c'est la vie. Not that anyone could have helped him anyway if he can't differentiate between our store and the one he needs to go to. I love it when customers hit you with the, "but they told me to come here." Who the hell is they? Can you have they contact me to corroborate your insanity? Customers assume I can't do my job, so they do it for me. I felt like sharing another old story from the shop where I used to work. I don't think I've ever been quite as lost for words as I was here. It was one of those situations that's so bizarre you don't really have any idea how to respond, but calm enough that you don't end up relying on adrenaline to form the responses for you. And whilst I was used to customers treating me as an inferior to them, this was probably the most blatant anyone had ever been about assuming I was incompetent. So for context, I worked in a music shop. Mostly selling sheet music, but we had some instruments too, mostly student/starter ones, and most of these instruments were guitars. I'm not a guitarist, I'm a classical musician and mostly played bowed string instruments, so I was pretty excited on the rare chance someone came in looking for a violin and I got to help with the thing I actually knew about. It was one of those rare days. I had a customer, a nicer older man, looking to buy a violin to start learning with. The manager was around too, but the interaction was mostly between me and the man as it was my area. I was in the violin section with the customer talking to him about the different sizes of violins. As he chose the one he wanted to try, a mother and her 2 mid-late teen children walked in. Now, the violin section was right next to the counter, so when they came up to it, they were inevitably right next to us. But of course I expected them just to speak to my manager who was sitting behind it. Instead, the 2 teenagers made a beeline for me and the man, and just as I was about to show him how to hold it, they came and stood literally between me and the customer and started showing him how to hold the violin. They didn't acknowledge me or give me a second glance, they just took one look at what was happening, assumed they knew better and stepped in. I tried multiple times to politely step back in myself, but my manager was incredibly awkward about dealing with weird customers, so I always felt I had to avoid confrontation in any way if she was just sitting there allowing something to happen. After several minutes of the teenagers straight up attempting to do my job for me, I just gave up and went and sat behind the counter. The man wasn't even listening to me anymore and was taking everything these kids were saying on board. I felt like I was no longer a part of the interaction, and hovering about on the side whilst they ignored me seemed weirder than just stepping away. As I returned to my spot behind the counter, the mother gave me the most condescending smile and said, "Well, of course they are both grade 8, so," and trailed off as if no explanation was required, and that was a good enough reason for why her children were more qualified to help the customer than I was. I don't feel like I should have to say this, but this wasn't the only time I had people assume that I didn't actually play an instrument or assume that I wasn't any good at it anyways, so I probably do have to mention it. I did have grade 8. I'd taken it in my teams myself about a decade before this story took place, and had plenty more musical education since then, meaning I knew quite a lot more than a couple of teenagers who'd presumably fairly recently got their grade 8. It was also worth mentioning for any non-musicians / possibly non-English people, I have no idea if graded music exams are the same in other countries, that having a grade 8 in your mid-late teens isn't particularly impressive. It's not bad either, but almost everyone who's been learning since childhood and takes it seriously has done their grade 8 by that point. It's just not really a boasting point when you're around other musicians, because we've all met hundreds of teenagers with grade 8s in their instrument, and most of us were one at some point as well. I kind of wish I'd said all of that to them, but let's be honest, if my manager didn't say anything, then I felt like I couldn't really either. So I just gave her my least convincing smile and didn't answer, letting her believe that I was just so inferior to her genius children. Once they'd bought the books they came in for and left, I had to go over everything they'd told the man and correct half of it because it was totally wrong. Joy. I mean, I've had this before. The best thing to do is to deal directly with the rude customer and get them gone. Then you interrupt their helping. The manager needs to grow a set and jump in as well. OP shouldn't have been left alone in this situation. But I honestly thought the story was going to go the way that OP grabbed the violin and started playing themselves. I think that would have been really impressive. Insulted, paranoid, or both? So I still don't know how to take this. Before I get into it, let me start by saying that I've lived in a pretty decent area. The city itself is ranked high a few times for crime, but it was overall crime, so the boost usually came from pot possession before it was legalised. I've worked for the same company for a few years, in a few different stores, and whilst the majority of customers were 60 plus for most of my time there, they're generally okay. This was a first for me. Monday I was at work. Normally I work the self-checkouts, but for this shift I was on an actual till. Everything was going pretty smoothly, it was just a typical day with typical customers. Close to the end of my shift I had an older couple come through. They didn't have too much of an order and no produce to key in, so I had it all scanned quickly. The whole thing couldn't have taken more than 2 minutes, both customers were friendly and joking about the snow. Then it came time for them to pay. So husband continues to bag the grocery whilst wife pays. All good, right? No. There must have been a tiny bit of dust on her card, or it was off-center a smidge, so the card reader came up with an error. Now our machines are older, so the error message is very common, to the point I don't even have to turn it around to see the screen to fix it. Usually all it takes is swiping your finger over the chip to remove lintel or dust, or inserting the card with a bit more force so the machine grabs it. That was my plan. I deal with this situation at least a dozen times per shift. So I said, "Oh, just a sec, I can fix that, I just need to see your card a sec." Well, damn, you would have thought I'd held a gun to her head and demanded her wallet. She looks at me and says, "Why? What are you going to do?" So I explained it's just usually a bit of dust or lint, I was going to wipe the chip. That's when she said, "No, it's not what you want to do. You don't want to do that. You aren't going to do that." So she tries inserting her card again. Same problem, the 2 attempts must have dislodged the dust because the 3rd time it worked. I don't know how to process the exchange. I've never had someone imply that I'm going to steal from them because I offered to fix the issue with their card in the machine. The 2 customers that followed her witnessed the whole exchange and were joking around with me, which made me feel a little bit better, but it's still kind of bugging me. So some elderly are paranoid about debit cards and chip readers, but one thing I find cropping up more and more, especially where I work, is that the elderly don't like using the contactless. I guess it's just such a completely new concept, it seems wrong and quite risky and shady, even though I'm sure it's perfectly safe and easy to use. Lowest of the low. So there's one thing beside Karens that we all have to deal with in the retail industry that's just as annoying. Shoplifters. This is the story of the ones that actually made me the most angry. One day at large name electronics store, I'm at the front in mobile when I notice 2 women walk in pushing huge strollers with one hand and baby carriers in the other. Whoa, I thought, that's pretty absurd amount of babies. Until I noticed that the baby carriers were empty and the babies were in the strollers. Alright, they just didn't want to leave big posh baby carrier seat things in the car. It's kind of a rough neighbourhood, I get it. 5 minutes later and I'm on the walkie-talkie and I hear Dee, the asset protection woman. She's got a weird vibe from these ladies who have since moved on to the video game section. Dee, God rest her soul, was a brick wall of a woman, about 50 years old and way beyond giving a single solitary She's the security guard to end all security guards, and her spidey sense had 100% accuracy. So naturally, on a slow day, I and all the other board associates make rounds in video games because it's fun to mess with the shrink watches. This is when I'm treated to the sight of the woman with their babies now in the carriers, but a large distinctly baby-shaped lump is still in each stroller underneath a blanket. A more tenured manager and I go and confront them, and the manager pulls the blankets off about $300 worth of video games that these women were trying to steal. But that's not the worst part. I glance down at the babies in their carriers because they're shifting uncomfortably, and I see that distinctive Xbox One green underneath the baby. That's right, they were trying to hide more stolen games underneath their children. We recovered all of the games and told them never to return. Personally, I think the cops and CPS should have been called. Yeah, one time I saw a woman enter our store from the mall. She was pushing a double baby stroller, and no babies were visible because she had both seats covered with kind of a large blanket. Oddly for someone out with 2 children, there was nothing else on the stroller. There was like no toys, there were no diaper bags, no sippy cups, nothing. The woman was only carrying a small kind of crossbody bag. Did I think that the stroller was full of merch from another store? Yep. Could I do anything about it? No, because she made a beeline for the nearest outside exit and touched nothing in our store, so I felt really awkward. Well folks, that's it for today's video. If you guys did enjoy, leave a like rating down below and I'll see you all in the next video. Goodbye.